in the ruins of an ancient cathedral. A single candle has burned for centuries, never melting, never dying. When Father Elias arrives to prove it's nothing more than superstition, he finds a flame that breathes and whispers with the voices of the dead. Each attempt to extinguish it awakens something darker, an echo of forbidden faith, bound by a ritual that defied death itself. Now, trapped between belief and damnation, Elias must uncover the truth behind the eternal fire before it consumes his soul. The ancient cathedral loomed ahead, its silhouette a jagged scar against the bruised sky. Father Elias paused at the threshold, the heavy wooden doors groaning faintly as he pushed them open. A gust of cold, stale air swept past him, carrying the faint scent of mold and forgotten prayers. His boots echoed hollowly on the cracked stone floor, each step stirring motes of dust that danced in the pale light filtering through shattered stained glass. He adjusted the collar of his worn clerical robe, eyes narrowing beneath furrowed brows. The rumors had seemed absurd. An eternal candle, burning for centuries without falter, nestled in the heart of this abandoned sanctuary. A relic of faith or superstition. Elias had come to find out, driven by a blend of skepticism and an unspoken need to confront the darkness that had shadowed his own life. The nave stretched before him, a cavernous shell of once sacred beauty, now surrendered to decay. Stone pillars, mottled with moss and cracks, rose like silent sentinels, their capitals carved with twisted faces half swallowed by time. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant drip of water seeping through the roof, and the faint whisper of wind sneaking through broken mullions. At the far end where the altar once commanded reverence, a faint glow flickered. Elias's gaze sharpened. Moving cautiously, he approached the source, a solitary candle perched upon a wrought iron stand, its flame dancing in shades of blue and red that seemed unnatural against the dull gray stone around it. He knelt, the cold seeping through his robes as he studied the flame. It pulsed softly, alive in a way that defied reason. Elias's breath caught not from fear, but from the stubborn flicker of a light that refused to be snuffed. His hand reached out instinctively, fingers curling as if to smother the flame, but he hesitated. The air thickened, as if the cathedral itself had drawn a breath. A sudden noise, a shifting, like the rustle of fabric or a whisper too faint to catch, stirred the shadows behind him. Elias turned swiftly, sharp eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing moved, yet a weight settled on his chest, pressing down with the chill of unseen watchers. He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Superstition, he muttered, rising to his feet. A trick of the light. But as he prepared to extinguish the candle, a flicker of doubt crept in. What if this was more than mere superstition? What if the flame was a beacon not of hope, but of something far darker? The candle burned on, its eerie light casting long, trembling shadows. And somewhere, in the cathedral's ruined depths, unseen eyes followed Elias's every move. The first step had been taken, but the path ahead was shrouded in shadows yet to be revealed. Father Elias took a deep breath and reached for the candle's base, determined to prove the eternal flame was nothing more than a relic of superstition. Yet, as his fingers brushed the wax, a chill ran through him, an unspoken warning whispered by the cathedral itself. Outside, the sky darkened further, and the wind moaned like a mournful hymn through the broken arches. The candle flickered, but it did not falter. The eternal fire was waiting. Father Elias stepped cautiously into the cathedral's decay, his boots echoing against the fractured stone floor. The air was thick with dust and a faint scent of melted wax, but beyond that, a subtle chill clung to the shadows. Ahead, upon the altar, the solitary candle burned with an eerie light, a flame unlike any Elias had ever seen. It flickered with an unnatural mix of blue and red hues, casting twisted shadows that danced malevolently along the cracked walls. He approached the candle with measured steps, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. To extinguish this eternal flame was his task, a task he accepted with a skeptical mind, but a heavy heart. The stories of cursed fire and restless souls were, to him, the ramblings of superstition, yet the sight before him unsettled his reason. Taking a deep breath, Elias reached for the small pewter snuffer he had carried since his arrival. His hand trembled ever so slightly, betraying the calm mask he wore. The flame danced as if sensing his intent, flickering defiantly. Elias bent low, his sharp eyes fixed on the flame's core. With a swift motion, he covered the candle's mouth with the snuffer, cutting off its oxygen. The flame sputtered, its blue-red glow faltering, then vanished. For a moment, an eerie silence filled the cathedral, broken only by the distant drip of water from the fractured ceiling. Elias exhaled slowly, a faint smile of triumph touching his lips. But the silence was deceptive. Within seconds, a faint glow re-emerged where the flame once had been. The candle relit itself, the unnatural colors pulsing with renewed vigor. Elias recoiled, his heart pounding as he stared in disbelief. The flame's light seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, throbbing in the oppressive gloom. "Impossible," Elias muttered, stepping back. "It cannot be." Jonathan Crane, who had been standing quietly near the nave's entrance, raised an eyebrow. "Looks like that candle has other plans." He flicked on his camera, the lens capturing the eerie light, the blue and red dancing like spectral tongues. Before Elias could respond, a sharp, agonized cry shattered the stillness from outside the cathedral's heavy wooden doors. Both men rushed out into the cold night air, their breaths misting in the chill. A small crowd had gathered around a man lying motionless on the damp earth, his face pale and eyes wide with death. "He's gone," a villager whispered, voice trembling. Elias knelt beside the body, his mind racing. The candle, the flame, was this death connected? He glanced back toward the cathedral, where through the stained glass windows the candle's light flared brightly. As if feeding on the tragedy, a cold dread seeped into Elias's bones. He felt the weight of unseen eyes watching him from the darkness, and the cathedral around him seemed to pulse with a sinister life. For the first time, the boundaries between faith and fear blurred. Back inside, Elias stared intently at the candle. Its flame was no longer just a flicker of wax and wick, it was a beacon of something cursed, something that fed on death and despair. His mind churned with questions he dared not yet voice. "This isn't mere superstition," he whispered. "There's a darkness here, tied to this flame." Jonathan nodded, lowering his camera. "And it's not going anywhere." The chill in the air deepened, and faint whispers seemed to rise from the stone walls, voices lost to time, begging, warning, cursing. Elias clenched his fists, resolve hardening. This was no simple investigation anymore. He was locked in a battle against a force older and darker than he had imagined. As the night stretched onward, the candle's flame flickered in the growing shadows, immortal and unyielding. And Father Elias knew that extinguishing it would demand more than he had ever prepared for. But he would try. One way or another, he would snuff out the eternal fire or be consumed by it. Father Elias stepped cautiously through the cathedral's nave, the once majestic sanctuary now a husk of shattered stained glass and crumbling stone. His boots echoed softly against the cold, cracked marble floor as he moved toward the altar, where the eternal candle flickered with an unnatural steadiness. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, yet beneath it lingered something older, something mournful and charged with silent power. He knelt before the altar, his fingers tracing the worn Latin inscriptions etched into the stone. The words had faded with time, but hints of their meanings stirred in his mind, prayers, invocations, warnings. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows that danced like restless spirits across the ancient walls. A shiver ran down his spine, though he refused to yield to superstition. As he straightened, a soft shuffle echoed from a side chamber. Elias turned to see an elderly woman emerge from the shadows, her habit tattered, but her movements deliberate and steady. Her eyes, soft yet piercing, held a depth of knowledge and sorrow that unsettled him unexpectedly. "Sister Miriam," Elias greeted cautiously, recalling the caretaker's name from local whispers. "I did not expect to find anyone here." She smiled faintly, the lines on her face deepening with a mix of warmth and melancholy. "If you come here willingly, Father Elias." But the cathedral does not surrender its secrets easily. He gestured toward the altar. "This candle, it burns still. I intend to understand it, to end this myth." Sister Miriam's gaze drifted toward the flickering flame. "Myth, yes, but also curse. The flame feeds on more than wax and wick. It hungers for souls, bound by ancient rites that twisted faith into something dark." Elias frowned, skepticism warring with the chill creeping through his bones. "What kind of rites?" She beckoned him to follow into a cramped chamber behind the altar, where relics lay scattered beneath layers of dust. On a rickety wooden table rested a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and pages yellowed with age. "This belonged to Father Gregory," she said softly, her fingers brushing the fragile book, "a man whose faith became his undoing." Elias opened the journal carefully. The handwriting was spidery and uneven, penned in a hurried desperation. The entries spoke of resurrection rites, prayers, and ceremonies meant to defy death itself. Father Gregory's voice echoed through the pages, filled with hope, fear, and ultimately despair as his experiments with forbidden resurrection failed and birthed the eternal flame. The candle's glow seemed to pulse as Elias read, as if responding to the dread that seeped from the cursed past. Each word brought the cathedral's haunted legacy into sharper focus, unraveling the thin veil between faith and damnation. Sister Miriam's voice broke through his thoughts. "The flame is not merely fire, it is a prison for restless souls, a beacon of corrupted faith. It will not die until the curse is broken, but breaking it demands a price." Elias closed the journal, his mind racing. The candle was no longer a superstition to extinguish. It was a living testament to pain and loss, bound to the cathedral's very bones. The shadows around them seemed to thicken, the silence heavy with unseen eyes watching, waiting. "I must understand," Elias said quietly, "even if it means confronting the darkness within myself." Sister Miriam nodded, her eyes reflecting both hope and warning. "Then we walk a perilous path together, Father. The past whispers its secrets, but not all answers bring peace." As the candle flickered between blue and red hues, Elias felt the first true crack in his skepticism. The cathedral was alive with memories and curses, and the eternal flame's story was far from over. The journey into the heart of darkness had only just begun. Outside, the wind howled through the broken arches, carrying with it the faintest echo of prayers long forgotten and the restless whispers of the past. And somewhere deep within the cathedral's shadows, the candle burned on, refusing to die. The vastness of the cathedral seemed to swallow every sound but the faint, unnatural flicker of the solitary candle. Father Elias stood motionless, the cold stone floor pressing against his worn boots. As the trembling flame cast grotesque shadows that writhed like living things against the cracked walls. An uneasy chill crept up his spine, defying his reasoned mind and the skeptical armor he had forged over years of study and loss. He had come expecting decay and silence, a simple investigation to disprove superstition. Yet in this desolate sanctuary, something stirred, something that defied explanation. The candle's flame danced erratically, its eerie hues of blue and red blending in a spectral dance that seemed almost sentient. Elias's sharp eyes narrowed, trying to pierce the gloom, but the shadows twisted with a life of their own, lengthening and contorting into shapes that whispered of torment. Sudden whisper brushed past his ear, soft and fragmented like the rustling of dead leaves. Eyes spun, heart pounding, but saw only empty air. The cathedral's vast arches echoed with the faintest murmurs, voices broken and pleading, impossible to grasp yet impossibly real. "Help us." The voices seemed to sigh, a chorus of despair that clawed at his mind. He gripped the edge of a pew for support, struggling to steady his breath. "It's just the wind," he muttered, though no breeze stirred the stagnant air. Yet the whispers persisted, growing in urgency, a spectral litany that gnawed at the edges of his skepticism. The candle flickered violently, and for a heartbeat, Elias saw it, the flame shifting, its shape elongating until it resembled a ghostly visage. The face was pale and gaunt, eyes burning with a furious, unnatural fire. It was Father Gregory the priest, whose name had echoed through the whispered lore of this place. The man whose failed resurrection ritual had birthed this cursed flame. Elias staggered back, breath catching in his throat. The apparition's eyes locked with his, accusing and filled with agony. A silent scream seemed to radiate from the flame itself, a soundless cry that echoed in the hollow chambers of Elias's soul. The candle's glow pulsed, bathing the cryptic inscriptions around him in a sinister light. He closed his eyes, willing the vision to vanish, but the torment lingered. When he opened them again, the shadows had thickened, and the whispers had grown into a chorus of lamentation. The cathedral was alive with the restless dead, their presence woven into the very stone and flame. His hands trembled as he pulled his journal from his coat, the leather cover worn and familiar. Scribbling furiously, Elias tried to capture the impossible, the creeping dread that gnawed at his faith. Doubt twisted within him, a serpent coiling tighter with each passing moment. The eternal flame was no mere superstition, it was a beacon of cursed faith, a terrible echo of resurrection gone wrong. Outside, the sky darkened further, a storm gathering on the horizon. Within the cathedral's shattered sanctity, Elias felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. The shadows stirred, the whispers grew louder, and the candle flickered once more, refusing to die, refusing to be ignored. He whispered a prayer, not for protection, but for understanding. For now, all he knew was that the darkness was no longer a mere absence of light, but a living entity, intertwined with the eternal fire and the souls it bound. And Father Elias, once a skeptic, was caught in its relentless grasp. As the night deepened, the cathedral seemed to breathe with a sinister life of its own. Elias's resolve hardened, tempered by fear and fascination alike. The shadows stirred, and the eternal flame waited its cursed dance far from over. He was no longer alone. The haunting had begun. The skeletal silhouette of the cathedral loomed against the steel grey sky as Jonathan Crane approached. His boots crunching softly on the scattered debris that littered the ancient stone steps. He paused briefly at the threshold, adjusting the strap of his camera bag, a familiar weight grounding him amid the eerie aura that seemed to cling to the ruins like a second skin. The once majestic cathedral had fallen into a state of solemn decay, its stained glass windows shattered, the lofty arches scarred by centuries of neglect. Yet, amid this desolation, a solitary flame burned steadily on the altar, casting elongated shadows that danced with unsettling life. Jonathan's arrival was timed to coincide with Father Elias's investigation, a convergence born of mutual necessity and contrasting worldviews. As a journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, Jonathan was drawn not only by the candle's mysterious endurance, but by the chance to document a story that defied easy explanation. His camera equipment, an assortment of high-sensitivity lenses, infrared sensors, and audio recorders was his arsenal against the unknown. Tools designed to capture what the human eye often missed. Inside, Father Elias awaited, his figure a study in contrast to the cathedral's ruin. Clad in his worn clerical robes, the priest's gaunt face was etched with lines of skepticism and determination. His sharp eyes flicked up as Jonathan entered, a faint crease of surprise breaking his usual composure. Jonathan Crane, the journalist, introduced himself, extending a hand. "I've been following your work and the reports about this cathedral. Thought I'd see the eternal candle for myself." Elias nodded, the handshake firm but cautious. "The candle is more than a curiosity, it's a curse." Their conversation began with polite reserve but quickly slid into a more probing exchange. Jonathan's questions were pointed, his tone laced with a mix of professional skepticism and genuine intrigue. "You believe it's supernatural?" Elias's gaze hardened. "I've seen enough to doubt it's mere superstition, but belief, that is harder to claim." As Jonathan unpacked his gear, the cathedral's cold air seemed to thicken with anticipation. He positioned a camera near the altar, its lens trained on the flickering candle. The flame danced with an unnatural hue, flickering between eerie blues and subdued reds, shadows coiling within it as if alive. "I want to capture every detail," Jonathan explained, setting up an infrared sensor beside the camera. "If there's something here, the evidence will reveal it." Elias observed silently, the flicker of the candlelight reflecting in his sharp eyes. Their uneasy alliance hung suspended in the chill air, a fragile meeting of faith and inquiry. As night deepened, the cathedral seemed to breathe around them. The flickering flame cast wavering patterns across the cracked stone floor, its ethereal glow drawing Elias's gaze despite his efforts to remain detached. Jonathan adjusted his camera settings, the soft click of buttons punctuating the heavy silence. Suddenly, a gust swept through the nave, snuffing out Jonathan's flashlight. Darkness enveloped them, punctuated only by the stubborn glow of the eternal candle. Breath caught in their throats, they waited as the flashlight flickered weakly back to life. Jonathan's camera lens caught a flicker that neither had seen with the naked eye, a ghostly visage shimmering within the flame's core, a pale face twisted in silent torment. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the camera to Elias, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" Elias nodded slowly, a chill running down his spine. "It's more than a flame, it's a prison." The night stretched on, their dialogue a blend of scientific observation and spiritual unease. Jonathan's recordings captured whispers beneath the candle's crackle, faint murmurs that seemed to echo from the cathedral's very stones. Elias felt the walls close in, the air thick with unseen eyes. In the quiet moments, the two men found themselves bound by the mystery they sought to unravel, their conflicting beliefs weaving a complex tapestry of doubt and hope. The eternal candle flickered on, its light a beacon in the darkness, defying extinction and reason alike. As dawn threatened the horizon, Jonathan packed away his equipment, his expression thoughtful yet unsettled. "This isn't just a story," he murmured. "It's something." Alive, Elias met his gaze, the weight of his own uncertainties pressing heavy upon him. "And we are its witnesses." Outside, the first pale light crept across the cathedral's battered facade. Inside, the candle's flame burned steady, a silent sentinel to the secrets yet to be revealed. The alliance forged between skeptic and believer was uneasy, but necessary, for in the heart of the cathedral, the eternal fire awaited, patient and unyielding, its cursed glow refusing to die. And so their journey together began, each step forward shadowed by the flickering flame and the dark history it guarded. Father Elias followed Lena and Jonathan through the twisting lanes of the nearby village, the sky darkening with the slow crawl of evening. The air was thick with mist, and the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves clung to every breath. Lena walked ahead, her steps cautious and measured, eyes darting to every shadow as if expecting something unseen to emerge from the gloom. "The cathedral has long been a place of sorrow," Lena said in a voice barely above a whisper, her gaze fixed on the cracked cobblestones beneath their feet. "My grandmother told me stories, whispers from the past. They say the candle burns on because the souls trapped inside cannot find rest." Elias listened, his skepticism warring with the unease settling inside him. He had come seeking reason, explanations grounded in fact and theology, yet the village's palpable fear was impossible to ignore. Jonathan, ever the skeptic but intrigued, recorded Lena's words with his small voice recorder, its faint red light blinking steadily. As they reached the edge of the village, a heavy silence fell. Lena stopped beneath a weathered stone cross, its surface worn by centuries of rain. "Many have died here," she said, voice trembling. "Some said the flame feeds on their souls." Elias looked up at the looming silhouette of the cathedral beyond the trees, its broken spires piercing the darkening sky. The eternal candle burned somewhere within, its flame a cruel beacon in the gathering night. Back inside the cathedral's vast nave, Elias and Jonathan approached the solitary candle set upon an ancient altar. The flame flickered with unnatural hues, blue and red intertwining as if alive with some malevolent will. The light cast eerie shadows that stretched and writhed along the cracked stone walls, whispering secrets of centuries past. Suddenly, a scream shattered the silence, sharp and desperate. Elias's heart pounded as he turned toward the sound, Jonathan close behind. They rushed outside to find a man doubled over near the village outskirts, clutching his chest with a grimace of agony. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his eyes rolled back as he collapsed onto the cold earth. "Help!" Jonathan shouted, crouching beside the man, but the life was slipping away too quickly. Elias knelt, murmuring a prayer, but the man's grip loosened, his body slack with death. In that instant, a sudden flare erupted from the candle inside the cathedral. Elias felt the heat even from afar, the flame growing taller, more vibrant, as if hungry and alive. It pulsed with an intensity that cast dancing silhouettes, faces twisted in torment across the broken glass and shattered pews. The unholy connection between the man's death and the candle's resurgence was undeniable. Elias's mind raced with the implications. This was no ordinary flame. It was bound to the life force of those who perished near it, feeding on their souls to sustain its cursed existence. Jonathan's camera captured the phenomenon, the flickering light revealing spectral forms that seemed to reach out toward the living. "This is beyond anything I've seen," Jonathan whispered, voice tight with awe and fear. Elias's resolve hardened. The candle was more than a relic. It was a vessel of suffering, a twisted symbol of faith corrupted by unnatural resurrection. Every death near the cathedral reignited the flame, perpetuating a cycle of torment that had endured for centuries. That night, Elias sat alone in the cathedral's shadowed nave. The candle's renewed glow bathed the ruins in an unearthly light. Outside, the wind moaned through broken windows, carrying with it the faint tolling of distant church bells, a mournful dirge echoing the lives lost and the souls ensnared within the eternal flame's curse. He opened his journal, fingers trembling as he wrote. "The candle's fire is no mere superstition. It is tethered to death itself, feeding on the passage between worlds. To extinguish it may require a sacrifice I have yet to comprehend." As the candle flickered stubbornly before him, Elias felt the weight of the curse settle deep within his bones. The cathedral was alive with sorrow and darkness, its haunted legacy refusing to be forgotten. And as the eternal flame burned on, so too did the shadow of despair that threatened to engulf them all. The investigation had only just begun, but already Elias knew that the path ahead would demand everything he had and more. He closed his journal and rose, the candle's light casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the cold stone floor. The cathedral's silence pressed in around him, thick with the promise of horrors yet to come. Outside, the night deepened, and the eternal flame pulsed in time with the heartbeat of the cursed cathedral, an unyielding sentinel to the dead and the damned. And somewhere in the darkness a whisper echoed, "The fire never dies." Elias's breath hitched as he stared into the flame, the flickering light reflecting the storm of doubt and dread swirling within him. The candle had claimed another soul, and the curse grew stronger still. The buried secret, the cold stone beneath feet felt colder still as Father Elias and Sister Miriam knelt by the uneven flagstones of the cathedral's nave. The sunlight that had once bathed the sacred space now struggled to penetrate the thick layers of dust and crumbling mortar. The ancient cathedral, abandoned and hollow, seemed to hold its breath, as if guarding secrets too terrible to be disturbed. Elias wiped sweat from his brow despite the chill in the air. His sharp eyes fixed on the faint outline of a loose flagstone, one that Miriam's careful fingers had revealed earlier that day. The discovery had been subtle, an anomaly in the floor's pattern, a slight hollow beneath his touch. Yet beneath that stone lay the possibility of answers he had hunted for weeks. "Are you certain about this, sister?" Elias asked quietly, voice low enough not to disturb the cathedral's silence. Miriam nodded, her gentle face shadowed by the tattered remnants of her habit. "The cathedral's history has been buried for centuries, but the curse, it began long ago. What lies beneath may hold the truth. With a creak and a groan, the flagstone shifted, revealing a narrow, steep staircase descending into darkness. A stale, oppressive air rose from the depths, carrying the faintest scent of wax, and something else, something acrid and old. Elias lit his lantern, its flickering flame casting long shadows on the stone walls as they began their descent. The silence was broken only by the scrape of their boots and the distant drip of water echoing through the crypt. At the bottom, the crypt opened into a chamber lined with stone shelves. Ancient scrolls, brittle and yellowed with time, lay stacked beside relics of faith, crucifixes tarnished by age, fragmented candles, and worn leather-bound books. The air here was thick with the weight of history and an unspoken sorrow. Elias approached a small wooden desk, its surface cluttered with a crumbling journal. His fingers trembled as he carefully opened it, revealing faded ink and hurried scrawlings. The journal belonged to Father Gregory, a name whispered in the cathedral's lore with a mixture of reverence and dread. As Elias read, the story unfolded with harrowing clarity. Gregory had been a man of fervent faith, desperate to defy death itself. His resurrection rites, forbidden and blasphemous, had sought to reclaim souls from the brink of the afterlife. But the ritual had failed. Instead of salvation, it birthed a curse, an eternal flame that burned unceasingly, feeding on death and binding restless souls to the cathedral's shadowed walls. A sudden chill swept through the crypt, stirring dust motes in the lantern light. Elias shivered, the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him. Whispered voices, barely audible, seemed to rise from the stone floor itself, echoing the mournful cries of trapped souls. "Do you hear them?" Miriam's voice was barely a whisper. "They are bound here, unable to rest." Elias swallowed hard, his skepticism wavering beneath the oppressive atmosphere. The flame was no mere superstition, it was a dark legacy of corrupted faith and forbidden resurrection. His heart pounded as he closed the journal, the final words etched into his mind. The fire must not be allowed to die, for it feeds on death itself, but neither can it be left to burn, lest the souls remain shackled for eternity. A profound silence fell between them, broken only by the soft rustle of ancient parchment. Elias met Miriam's gaze, seeing reflected in her eyes the grim resolve he felt rising within himself. "This changes everything," he murmured. "The candle isn't just a flame, it's a prison, and Father Gregory's sin has chained countless souls here." Miriam nodded slowly. "And if the flame is linked to the curse, then extinguishing it may come at a terrible cost." Elias looked around the crypt, the weight of his mission pressing down like the stone above their heads. The path ahead was fraught with danger, not only from the supernatural force they faced, but from the moral abyss of tampering with souls caught between life and death. As he rose, determination hardened his features. The answers he sought were no longer in doubt. Father Gregory's failed resurrection ritual had sown the seed of the eternal flame's curse. And Elias knew that confronting this legacy meant facing the darkness buried deep within the cathedral and within himself. Yet as they ascended back into the waning light of the cathedral, Elias could not shake the feeling that the restless souls below were watching, waiting, their fate entwined with the flickering candle that refused to die. The secret buried beneath the ancient stones was no longer hidden. The cathedral lay shrouded in a heavy silence, broken only by the faint, irregular flicker of the solitary candle that burned atop the ancient altar. Father Elias stood motionless in the nave, his eyes fixed on the flame that danced with an eerie vitality. It was no ordinary light. The colors shifted unnaturally, wavering between ghostly blue and a deep, unsettling red. The air around it seemed charged, cold yet alive with a presence that defied logic. As Elias stepped closer, the flame began to twist and contort, its shape no longer fixed, but fluid and grotesque. Faces anguished, hollow-eyed, and silent materialized and vanished within the blaze. Their features were twisted in eternal torment, their mouths open in voiceless screams that rippled through Elias's very soul. The flickering visages reached out like spectral hands, clawing at the edges of the flame, imploring and accusing. A shiver ran down Elias's spine. He clenched his fists, the worn leather of his gloves creaking softly. "This cannot be," he whispered, voice cracking. "It's just a trick of the light. A hallucination born of shadows and old stones." But deep within, he knew it was more. The flame was alive in a way that defied reason, a beacon for the restless souls ensnared by the cathedral's cursed past. He thought of the journal he had found, the ancient rites of resurrection, the failed attempts to conquer death that had birthed this eternal torment. The heavy wooden doors creaked open behind him, and soft footsteps echoed through the vast space. Sister Miriam appeared from the shadows, her faded habit trailing behind her like a ghostly wraith. Her eyes, gentle yet sorrowful, met Elias's with a knowing look. "You see them," she said quietly, her voice a fragile thread in the vast silence. Elias nodded, swallowing hard. "The faces, trapped in the flame. What does it mean?" She approached the altar slowly, producing from beneath her cloak a fragile manuscript, its edges yellowed and brittle with age. "These are the souls caught by Father Gregory's folly," she murmured, placing the manuscript gently on the stone surface. The resurrection rites he performed were unnatural, driven by desperation and pride. Instead of granting life, he bound death itself to this flame. It feeds on the souls, never allowing them rest. Elias reached out, his fingers trembling as he traced the faded ink that told the tale of corrupted faith and forbidden rituals. Each word weighed heavily on his conscience. The eternal flame was not a mere superstition. It was a manifestation of a profound spiritual corruption, a hunger for life beyond nature's design that had doomed countless souls. "Why?" Elias asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why would faith lead to such horror?" Sister Miriam sighed, her gaze distant. "Faith, when twisted by fear and obsession, can become a curse. The desire to conquer death blinds the heart to the price it demands. This flame is the price, and the cathedral its prison." The candle's light pulsed suddenly, casting grotesque shadows that writhed along the cracked stone walls. The faces inside the flame seemed to scream silently, their torment echoing in the cold stillness. Elias felt a wave of despair wash over him, the weight of centuries pressing down like a shroud. He sank to his knees, clutching the prayer book to his chest, breath ragged in the frigid air. Doubt gnawed at him, tearing at the fabric of his once steady faith. Could he still believe in a benevolent God when faced with such darkness? Was his mission to extinguish the candle a fool's errand, or worse, a sacrilege? Yet beneath the despair flickered a stubborn flame within Elias himself, a will to understand, to confront the curse and perhaps find redemption for the souls trapped within the cathedral walls. As the candle's light flickered once more, casting its spectral faces into sharp relief, Elias whispered a prayer not for the flame, but for himself. "Grant me strength," he said, "to face the truth and bear its burden." Outside, the wind moaned through broken stained glass, carrying with it the faintest echo of voices long lost to time. The eternal candle burned on, its true face unveiled, and Elias's journey into the heart of darkness deepened irrevocably. The night stretched on, heavy with portent. As the candle's ghostly flames danced like the restless souls, it imprisoned an eternal testament to corrupted faith and the terrible price of resurrection. And within Elias, the fragile boundary between skepticism and belief began to crumble, setting the stage for the harrowing trials yet to come. Father Elias sat alone in the vast, echoing nave of the abandoned cathedral, the cold stone beneath him seeping its chill into his bones. The eternal candle burned steadily before him, its flame an unnatural meld of blue and red, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the cracked walls. The whispers that had begun in the recesses of his mind now swirled around him, faint at first but growing clearer, more insistent, a chorus of anguished souls caught between worlds. He gripped the worn photograph in his hand, the edges frayed from countless nights of restless reflection. It was the face of his lost friend, Father Thomas, whose mysterious illness had shattered Elias's faith and fueled his relentless skepticism. The memory of Thomas's final days, the whispered prayers, the futile ministrations haunted him with unbearable clarity. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, unbidden and unwelcome. "Why did you leave me, Thomas?" Elias muttered, voice cracking in the oppressive silence. The candle flickered violently in response, shadows twisting into a semblance of a face pale, sorrowful, and hauntingly familiar. The cathedral seemed to breathe, the air thickening with the scent of burnt wax and ancient incense. Suddenly, the stone floor beneath Elias seemed to dissolve, and he was plunged into a vision. Ethereal figures moved in ghostly procession, a ritual unfolding in spectral light. Father Gregory stood at its center, chanting in a language older than memory, his hands trembling as he attempted to bridge the veil between life and death. Elias's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and recognition. The vision revealed the failed resurrection ritual that had birthed the cursed flame, the price paid in souls bound eternally to this forsaken place. The metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of burnt offerings filled the spectral air, suffocating in their intensity. Shaken, Elias gasped, breaking the spell. His breath came ragged, his body slick with cold sweat. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, voices pleading for release, for salvation. The candle's flame roared to life, blue and red tongues licking the darkness with malevolent hunger. "Enough," Elias whispered fiercely, clenching his fists. But the wavering resolve within him betrayed his words. Doubt gnawed at his soul, a relentless tide eroding the foundations of his once steadfast faith. He rose unsteadily, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. "What are you truly?" he demanded, voice echoing through the cavernous space. The flame pulsed, as if breathing, the ghostly visages within its core reaching out with spectral fingers. A sudden chill swept through the cathedral, carrying with it the scent of decay and forgotten prayers. Elias felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him, the legacy of cursed faith entwined with the eternal fire. His skepticism faltered beneath the crushing reality of what he had witnessed and what he had become part of. He sank back onto the stone steps, the photograph slipping from his trembling hands. The faces in the shadows seemed to close in, their silent screams etched into his very being. The candle's light cast a cruel glow, illuminating the fracture within his soul. In that moment, Elias confronted not only the curse that plagued the cathedral, but the darkness within himself, the loss, the doubt, the fear. The eternal flame was no longer merely a superstition to be extinguished, but a living testament to the torment of faith stretched beyond its limits. As the night deepened, Elias clung to the fragile threads of hope, even as the candle's cursed fire burned stubbornly on, refusing to die. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril both supernatural and internal, but he knew he could no longer turn away from the truth that now consumed him. With a heavy heart and a wavering spirit, Father Elias prepared to delve deeper into the cathedral's shadowed past and into the depths of his own soul, where redemption and despair danced in uneasy tandem. The faltering flame within him mirrored the eternal candle, fragile, flickering, yet impossible to extinguish. The cold settled deeper into the cathedral as Father Elias followed Sister Miriam through the narrow, crumbling corridors leading to the sacristy, a small chamber rarely disturbed except by the whispers of memories it held. The air was thick with dust, motes dancing in the feeble shafts of light that pierced the cracked stained glass windows. The once sacred space now bore the weight of neglect and sorrow, and Elias could feel the oppressive stillness pressing on his chest. Sister Miriam moved with a fragile grace, her fingers tracing the edges of a weathered wooden table, as if seeking comfort from its ancient grain. Her habit was tattered, the fabric thin and worn, yet her eyes held a quiet strength that belied her frail appearance. "Father Elias," she began softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray the gravity of what she was about to share. "There are prayers, old and powerful, that have been whispered here long before your time. They are not mere words, but vessels of protection against the darkness that clings to this place. From beneath a pile of dust-covered books and brittle parchments, she produced a fragile scroll, its edges yellowed and curling. With reverence, she unfurled the parchment upon the table, revealing intricate Latin script penned in a careful, deliberate hand. The candlelight flickered, casting giant, writhing shadows against the cracked stone walls as Miriam began to chant the ancient prayer, her voice a haunting melody that seemed to ripple through the air. Elias stood silently, absorbing the cadence of her words. The language was foreign yet evocative, each syllable weaving a tapestry of solemn invocation and desperate plea. As Miriam's voice filled the room, Elias felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the cathedral's past bleeding into the present moment. The flame of the solitary candle nearby danced wildly, as if responding to the prayers with an eerie vitality. When the chant concluded, Miriam looked up, her eyes meeting Elias's with a mixture of hope and warning. "This flame," she said, nodding toward the eternal candle that burned stubbornly in the corner, "is no ordinary light. It is bound to the souls trapped within this cathedral, a beacon forged in a ritual that went horribly wrong. To extinguish it without understanding the cost is to risk unleashing a darkness far worse than this cursed fire." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cathedral's drafty walls. The priest's certainty that had driven him here now faltered, replaced by a knowing unease. He recalled the deaths he had witnessed, the candle's relentless rebirth, and the whispered legends that had seemed mere superstition until now. Sister Miriam's voice softened as she recounted stories handed down through generations, a history of faith twisted by desperation, of rituals meant to conquer death, but instead binding souls in eternal torment. "The flame feeds on death," she said quietly, "and the souls it traps are caught between worlds, unable to find rest." The priest's mind churned with questions, doubts, and fears. Could this flame truly be the manifestation of a curse born from corrupted faith? Was his mission to extinguish it a sacred duty or a reckless defiance of forces beyond his comprehension? A sudden gust rattled the ancient doors, the howl of wind snaking through the broken windows and extinguishing every candle in the room save the eternal flame. It flared suddenly, its blue and red hues casting ghostly visages upon the walls. Miriam's chant faltered, and an oppressive silence fell, broken only by the distant echo of a bell tolling somewhere beyond the cathedral's ruins. Elias's heart hammered in his chest. The flame seemed alive, watching, waiting. Sister Miriam reached out, pressing a trembling hand against his. "You must be cautious," she urged. "This is not merely a battle of flame and shadow, but of faith and soul." In that moment, Elias felt the weight of her words settle deep within him. His journey was no longer a simple quest to snuff out a superstition, but a pilgrimage through doubt, fear, and the fragile hope that redemption might still be found in this place of cursed light. As the candle's flicker played across their faces, Elias knew the path ahead would demand more than conviction. It would demand surrender, sacrifice, and the courage to face the darkness both without and within. The cathedral held its breath, the eternal flame flickering quietly, a silent sentinel to the unfolding battle of faith and despair. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the past whispered, waiting. The night was far from over. Jonathan Crane's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the focus on his camera, the lens zooming in on the solitary candle that burned with an unnatural flame deep within the cathedral's crumbling nave. The light struggled against the encroaching shadows, casting long, flickering shapes across the cracked stone floor. Silence hung heavy, punctuated only by the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. Jonathan exhaled slowly, fighting the cold that seemed to seep into his bones. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered to himself, the skeptic's voice wavering for the first time since arriving at the cathedral. He glanced toward Father Elias, who stood nearby, eyes sharp but wary, clutching his journal tightly. The priest's gaunt face was etched with lines of fatigue, but his resolve remained unbroken. Jonathan shifted his weight, feeling the weight of his equipment tug at his shoulders, a camera, a flashlight, and a voice recorder. Each device was a lifeline, a tool to capture proof of the inexplicable phenomena they both sought to understand. Yet tonight, the cathedral felt alive in a way that no machine could capture fully. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the nave, snuffing out Jonathan's flashlight. Darkness enveloped him like a living thing, and a low, whispering murmur echoed faintly around the vast, desolate space. His breath caught in his throat as he fumbled to turn the light back on. The whispers seemed to rise and fall with the flicker of the candle's blue and red glow, as if the flame itself breathed secrets into the cold air. "Did you hear that?" Jonathan called out, voice barely above a whisper. Father Elias nodded grimly. "The cathedral's curse is stirring. It does not like our presence." Jonathan swallowed hard, his journalistic curiosity clashing with a primal fear he could not deny. He turned back to his camera's display and paused the recording. Replaying the footage, he froze in place, eyes widening. Beside the candle, a shadowy figure flickered into view, a ghostly silhouette distorting and twisting with the flame's eerie light. "No way," Jonathan breathed. "What the hell is that?" Elias stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "The eternal flame feeds on death and despair. It's more than just superstition. It's a curse." The sinister presence grew bolder as the night deepened. What began as subtle disturbances soon escalated to outright attacks. Jonathan found himself face to face with an unseen force, invisible hands grasping at his throat, chilling his breath and squeezing the air from his lungs. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, gasping for air as the cathedral seemed to close in around him. "Elias!" he shouted, barely able to keep his footing. The priest rushed to his side, placing a steadying hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "Hold fast. We must not falter now." Despite his fear, Jonathan's determination hardened. He pressed record again, capturing every terrifying moment. His skepticism, once an impenetrable shield, cracked under the relentless weight of evidence. The curse was real, malevolent, and growing stronger. Throughout the harrowing night, Jonathan documented the supernatural wrath that the eternal flame unleashed. Each recording brought new revelations and new dangers. His camera caught fleeting glimpses of restless souls bound to the cathedral, their faces twisted in eternal torment. His voice recorder captured whispered prayers and ghostly lamentations. Yet, amidst the terror, Jonathan found an unexpected bond with Elias. The priest's faith, though shaken, offered a fragile anchor in the storm. Their alliance, born of necessity, grew into a partnership forged in shared fear and resolve. As dawn approached, the cathedral's shadows seemed to retreat, but the sense of menace lingered. Jonathan lowered his camera, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. He glanced at Elias, whose eyes reflected the same haunted understanding. "We were getting closer," Elias said quietly. "But the price may be higher than we imagined." Jonathan nodded, the line between skeptic and believer blurring irrevocably. The eternal flame's curse was no longer a distant mystery, it was a living nightmare, and they were trapped within its consuming heat. The night had taken its toll, but the story was far from over. Jonathan knew that to uncover the truth, he would have to risk everything: his sanity, his safety, and perhaps even his soul. And as the candle flickered once more, casting its unholy light across the ancient stones, he understood that the eternal flame was watching, waiting for its next move. With the first light of morning filtering through the broken, stained glass, Jonathan steadied his breath and prepared to face what lay beneath the cathedral's surface, where darkness and fire intertwined in a deadly dance. The investigation was no longer just a story to tell, it was a battle to survive, and the eternal flame was far from finished. The air grew colder with each step Father Elias took, the stone beneath his boots slick with dampness and age. The faint light of the cathedral above faded until it was swallowed entirely by the darkness of the crypt. In his hand, the lantern's flame flickered precariously, casting uncertain shadows that danced along the narrow spiral staircase. The scent of earth and decay clung to the air, mingling with the faint trace of burning wax that seemed to pulse from the depths below. As he reached the bottom, the heavy silence of the crypt enveloped him, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the vaulted chambers. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, faded frescoes of saints and sinners alike, their faces worn and hollowed by centuries of neglect. In the center of the chamber, resting atop a stone pedestal, was the source of the eternal flame, the cursed candle that had refused to die for centuries. Its eerie glow was unlike any ordinary fire. It flickered with unnatural blue and red hues, twisting and contorting into shapes that resembled anguish faces frozen in silent screams. Elias swallowed hard, feeling a tremor of unease ripple through his body. His fingers tightened around the lantern's handle, knuckles whitening. He had come here to end this nightmare, to snuff out the cursed flame and bring peace to the forsaken cathedral. Yet, standing before it now, the weight of the flame's malevolence pressed upon him like a physical force. A sudden chill swept through the crypt as ghostly whispers swirled around him, voices from beyond the veil threading through the stale air. They were faint at first, unintelligible murmurs that clawed at the edges of his sanity. Elias closed his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer to steady his shaking heart. "By the grace of God, grant me strength," he murmured. Opening his eyes, he took a cautious step forward. The candle's flame flickered violently, morphing into a grotesque visage, a twisted mask of agony and despair. Elias's breath caught in his throat as the faces of trapped souls seemed to press against an unseen barrier, their spectral forms reaching out as if begging for release. Memories of his lost friend surged unbidden, the ache of grief and doubt gnawing at his resolve. He had come as a skeptic, but now confronted with the tangible horror of the eternal flame, his faith wavered perilously. Yet retreat was not an option. He was compelled by something deeper, a need to understand, to confront the darkness that had ensnared so many souls. Drawing from the folds of his robe, Elias produced a small crucifix, its silver surface dulled by time. He held it aloft, voice steady despite the tremor beneath, chanting ancient prayers taught to him long ago. The crypt filled with the sound of his incantation, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. The candle flared angrily, shadows leaping from the flame like tendrils of smoke infused with malevolence. The air crackled with energy as a spectral force surged toward Elias, intent on crushing his spirit. The priest staggered but refused to yield, his voice rising in fervor. Visions assaulted his mind, images of failed resurrection rites, of Father Gregory's desperate attempts to cheat death, and of the souls bound to the flame's cursed existence. The cathedral's crypt became a battleground between light and shadow, faith and despair. In the heart of this spiritual tempest, Elias felt his own fears and doubts laid bare, yet, amid the chaos, a resolve crystallized. He would not let this cursed fire continue to feast on the innocent. But at what cost? As the flame hissed and roared, Elias prepared for the ultimate confrontation, knowing that the fate of the cathedral and his own soul hung in the balance. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint crackle of the dying flame. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps as he lowered the crucifix, sweat mingling with tears on his weary face. The ancient evil was not yet vanquished, but the battle had been joined. Somewhere deep within the shadows, the eternal flame pulsed still, waiting. The air in the crypt was thick, heavy with the weight of centuries, as Father Elias bent over the faded parchment sprawled across the cold stone altar. The faint flicker of a single candle cast long, wavering shadows, weaving a tapestry of light and darkness that danced across the damp walls. Sister Miriam stood silently behind him, her wrinkled hands folded in quiet prayer, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and a cautious hope. Elias's fingers trembled as he traced the ancient script, the words revealing the grim truth he had been dreading. The eternal flame was not merely a stubborn candle. It was a prison forged by a failed resurrection ritual centuries ago, a ritual that had bound countless restless souls to this forsaken place. The flame fed on death, yes, but it also held captive those who had been ensnared by the curse. "Father," Miriam's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 prayers. "If you put out the flame, those souls will be freed, but at what cost?" Elias swallowed hard, the knot in his throat tightening. He had come here to extinguish what he believed was a superstition, a relic of a faith twisted by fear and desperation. Yet now, confronted with the reality of the souls trapped within the flickering light, his certainty wavered. Jonathan Crane's footsteps echoed softly as he entered the crypt, camera in hand. "Whatever you decide, we're recording it," he said, his voice steady but edged with tension. "This isn't just a story anymore. It's a reckoning." Elias nodded, though his eyes remained locked on the candle. The flame pulsed rhythmically, shifting from a deep blue to a fiery red, and for a fleeting moment, Elias could swear he saw faces twisted, anguished, pleading. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the wick. The cold air pressed against his skin, and a chorus of silent screams rose in his mind, filling the crypt with unbearable sorrow. "This flame," Elias murmured, voice cracking, "holds the souls caught between life and death. To snuff it out is to release them, but what if they are lost to darkness once freed? What if the curse is only broken by sacrifice?" Sister Miriam stepped forward, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Faith is not the absence of doubt, Elias. It is the courage to face the unknown." Jonathan adjusted his camera, capturing every flicker of emotion on Elias's face. The priest's gaze hardened, resolve settling amidst the turmoil. He could no longer deny the terrible choice before him: preserve the eternal flame and its haunted legacy, or risk destroying it and the souls within with unknown consequences. The silence deepened, broken only by the subtle crackle of the candle's flame. Elias closed his eyes, drawing a shaky breath, and prepared to make his decision. Moments stretched into eternity as the flame danced before him, a symbol of cursed faith and the price of unnatural resurrection. In the stillness of the crypt, beneath the weight of history and hope, Elias reached out once more, this time with grim resolve. The candle flickered violently under his breath, as if resisting the inevitable. A sudden gust of wind snuffed the flame, plunging the crypt into darkness. For a heartbeat, nothing stirred. Then, a whispering wind swept through the chamber, soft, mournful, and filled with the echoes of countless souls finally set free. Elias opened his eyes. The candle was dark, but the air vibrated with a strange, fragile stillness. He had chosen sacrifice over preservation, faith over fear. Yet as the first tendrils of dawn filtered through the stained glass, a lingering chill warned that the curse's end was only a beginning. The eternal fire may have been extinguished, but its shadow remained, haunting the cathedral and the hearts of those who dared to confront it. Elias knew his journey was far from over. The crypt whispered secrets still, and the price of resurrection had yet to be fully paid. The choice was made, but the consequences were yet to unfold. And in the silence, the candle refused to die. Father Elias moved carefully down the narrow, crumbling stone steps that led into the cathedral's crypt. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the musty scent of damp earth and ancient decay. His lantern cast long, trembling shadows on the walls, but it was the flickering light ahead that drew his gaze, the eternal flame, still burning with that unnatural, eerie glow of blue and red. It pulsed like a heartbeat in the darkness, casting ghostly shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of his vision. He paused at the foot of the stairs, gripping his crucifix tightly, the worn silver cool against his palm. The silence around him was oppressive, broken only by the faint, unsettling crackle of the flame's dancing light. It was unlike any fire he had ever seen, alive, sentient, feeding on something beyond mere fuel. The faces within the flame's glow flickered for a moment, revealing anguished visages of souls trapped in eternal torment, their silent screams reaching out to Elias's very spirit. Memories surged unbidden, his lost friend's frail face, the whispered prayers in the night, the long nights spent questioning his faith. The flame seemed to feed on his doubt, growing brighter, more threatening. Yet beneath the fear, A steely resolve took root. He had come too far to falter now. "By the grace of God," he whispered, stepping forward, "I will end this." His voice echoed through the crypt, swallowed by the cavernous space. The flame flickered violently as if sensing his challenge. Shapes emerged, twisted forms of those who had fallen to the curse, their eyes hollow, their mouths opening in silent wails. The heat of the fire was no longer merely physical. It burned at his very soul, igniting fears and regrets he had buried deep. Elias raised the crucifix, murmuring prayers in Latin, ancient rites he had hesitated to invoke until now. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but carried a desperate power. The flame recoiled, hissing like a beast wounded but not defeated. Shadows leapt from the walls, swirling around him in a tempest of despair and rage. As the struggle intensified, Elias felt the weight of his own failings pressing down a past marked by loss, his wavering belief flickering like a candle against a storm. The flame whispered promises of resurrection, of defying death itself, but at a terrible cost. Summoning all his faith and will, Elias stepped closer, pressing the crucifix toward the heart of the flame. The crypt shook with a sound like thunder, the cursed fire flaring in a blinding explosion of light and shadow. Then, silence. When his eyes adjusted, the flame was gone. In its place lay a faint glow beneath the ashes, smoldering embers that seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat not quite stilled. Elias sank to his knees, breathless, his soul forever marked by the battle he had endured. The cathedral above was still, but the weight of the eternal curse lingered, a whisper in the dark corners of the ruined sanctuary. Elias knew the fight was not truly over. The flame might be extinguished, but its shadow endured. Rising slowly, he took one last look at the crypt's depths. "Let this be the end," he murmured, though a part of him feared it never would be. His journey of faith, doubt, and torment had reached a turning point, one that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Outside, dawn broke pale and cold over the cathedral. The eternal flame had been challenged, its fate decided in the crucible of darkness. But somewhere deep within the stones, a quiet pulse remained. The candle that refused to die flickered still, a silent testament to cursed faith and the price of resurrection. Elias stepped out of the crypt, the weight of the past and the uncertain future heavy on his shoulders. As the first light of morning touched the cathedral's shattered stained glass, he knew his life and his soul had been forever changed. The air in the cathedral's crypt was thick with a silence that pressed heavily against Father Elias's chest, as if the very stones around him were holding their breath. The flickering candle, perched on a cold stone altar, burned with an unnatural dance of blue and red flames, casting grotesque shadows that writhed and twisted like living things upon the ancient walls. Elias's gaunt face was pale, eyes sharp but tired, etched with the weight of countless, sleepless nights, and the burden of the impossible choice before him. He stepped closer, the worn soles of his shoes echoing faintly on the flagstones. The flame seemed to pulse in response, its eerie light flickering against the hollows of his sharp cheekbones. Around him, the air was charged with whispered voices, soft, mournful, and accusing echoes of souls bound to this cursed place, trapped in a liminal dance between life and death, fire and ash. Sister Miriam stood nearby, her frail frame silhouetted against the dying light filtering down from the cathedral's fractured stained glass. Her habit, tattered and faded, hung loosely around her small shoulders. But her hands were steady as she reached out to clasp Elias's in a gesture of both comfort and shared resolve. Her eyes, soft and luminous even in the dimness, reflected a flicker of hope mingled with the deep fear she carried for the consequences of what was to come. "This is the only way," she whispered, voice trembling but resolute. "The flame feeds on death and despair. To snuff it, you must offer yourself your faith, your very soul as the final ember." Jonathan Crane, ever the skeptic but now visibly shaken, stood a few paces behind, clutching his camera. His rugged face was pale under the ghostly light, eyes wide as he recorded the moment that would define all they had endured. "Are you sure there's no other way?" he asked, voice low and urgent. Elias met his gaze, a flicker of pain crossing his sharp eyes. "There is no other way, Jonathan. This fire is a curse born of twisted faith and unnatural resurrection. It must die, or it will consume this place, and all who linger here forever." With a steadying breath, Elias extended his hand toward the flame. The moment his skin touched the fire, an intense heat roared through him, sharp and biting, as if the flame sought to burn not just flesh but spirit. Sparks flew like angry spirits released from their bonds, illuminating the crypt in a fleeting blaze of terrifying beauty. Pain seared through his veins, but he held firm, clutching the candle's base as the fire writhed and screamed in colors no human eye should witness. Around them, the cathedral seemed to shudder, the ancient stones groaning beneath the weight of unspoken curses. The flickering flame surged violently one last time, casting ghostly faces and twisted visages into the shadows before collapsing into smoldering ash that crumbled silently to the floor. Elias staggered back, breath ragged, skin blistered but soul unbroken. The oppressive presence that had filled the crypt for centuries seemed to dissipate, replaced by a heavy, almost tangible silence. Yet, as he looked to Sister Miriam and Jonathan, his eyes betrayed a lingering unease, an unshakable sense that while the candle's light had died, the darkness it fed upon had not vanished entirely. "It is over," Sister Miriam murmured, though her voice lacked the certainty she so desperately wished to convey. Jonathan lowered his camera, his usual skepticism replaced by a quiet awe. "For now," he said softly. Elias sank to his knees, the weight of his sacrifice settling deep within. His faith, once steadfast and unyielding, was shattered and transformed in the crucible of the eternal flame. Where once he had believed in clear absolutes, now only shadows and embers remained, fragile, uncertain, but perhaps, just perhaps, a beginning. Outside, the cathedral's vast, shattered windows caught the faint glow of dawn. Light began to creep through the cracked glass, touching the ruin with a pale warmth. Somewhere deep within, beneath the ash and silence, a faint pulse flickered, a whisper of the flame that refused to die. And Father Elias, forever changed, rose slowly to face a new dawn, his soul marked by the fire he had conquered and the shadows he would carry always with him. But the eternal flame story was not yet finished. It lingered in the breath of the wind, the echo of whispered prayers, and the restless silence of the cathedral's heart waiting for the day it might rise again. The battle was won, yes, but the war, that was another matter entirely. As Elias stepped from the crypt, his footsteps echoed in the hollow chamber. The candle was no more, yet the shadows seemed to breathe, aware, watching. The curse was not dead, it was merely sleeping, and the flame refused to die. The early morning light struggled to penetrate the fractured stained glass windows of the ancient cathedral, casting fractured patterns of pale color onto the cold stone floor. Father Elias sat on the worn steps near the great entrance, his back resting against the cracked pillar as he stared toward the altar. The space where the eternal candle once burned was now empty, a hollow void where the unnatural flame had finally been extinguished. The silence hung heavy around them, not the peaceful quiet of rest, but an oppressive stillness that seemed to pulse with something unseen, something unresolved. Jonathan Crane settled beside him, exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders and the dark circles beneath his eyes. Despite his usual bravado and sharp skepticism, the events they had witnessed left an indelible mark on him. He pulled out his camera and switched on the screen, scrolling through footage that captured moments of terror, confusion, and the inexplicable. Yet even the recordings failed to fully capture the weight of what had transpired within these walls. "It's gone," Jonathan murmured, nodding toward the empty altar. "No flame, no fire. But I don't think this is over." Elias sighed, rubbing his hands over his worn clerical robes. "I hoped it would be," he admitted. "But this silence, it feels like the calm before something else. The curse, if it's a curse at all, is not a thing you simply snuff out. It lingers in the shadows, in the memories, in the souls trapped here. He rose slowly, his joints stiff from hours spent in restless vigilance. Walking cautiously through the cathedral, Elias' footsteps echoed hollowly across the ruined nave. Broken pews lay scattered like forgotten relics of a forgotten faith, their surfaces thick with dust and debris. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and carried a faint whisper that seemed to drift, just beyond hearing, a susurrus of lost prayers and mournful sighs. Elias paused beneath a collapsed archway, his sharp eyes scanning the dim corners where shadows clung stubbornly. He could almost feel the eyes of the restless dead upon him, the weight of centuries pressing down with a suffocating inevitability. The victory of extinguishing the flame felt hollow. The price had been steep, and the consequences still veiled in uncertainty. Jonathan moved to Elias's side, lowering his camera as a chill ran down his spine. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "Something shadow shifting, not just the wind." Elias nodded grimly. "The darkness has not fully receded. This place is steeped in ancient pain." The eternal flame was born from desperation, from a faith twisted by fear of death. They retreated to a small alcove near the rear of the cathedral, where Elias pulled a battered journal from his satchel. The leather cover was cracked and worn, a testament to the countless nights it had absorbed his thoughts and fears. Lighting a small lantern, he began to write, his pen moving slowly, deliberately. "Today," he began, "I witnessed the extinguishing of an unnatural fire, but I am not certain the end has come." The candle burned with the souls of the lost, bound by a curse wrought from man's refusal to accept death's finality. In silencing its flame, we may have silenced only its voice. The weight of his words settled between them like a tangible thing. Jonathan watched him, the young journalist's usual skepticism, replaced by a profound respect tinged with fear. "So what now?" he asked softly. "Do we leave? Do we warn others?" Elias looked up, eyes shadowed but resolute. "We carry the memory. We bear witness. And we pray that what we have done will be enough to protect others from this place. But I fear the eternal flame's curse is not so easily banished." Outside, the wind stirred the broken branches of the surrounding trees, their skeletal forms silhouetted against the pale dawn. Somewhere deep within the cathedral, a faint pulse of light flickered, not the roaring flame that had once burned defiantly, but a subtle, unearthly glow that seemed to breathe quietly in the darkness. The candle that refused to die had been silenced, but its story was far from over. Elias closed his journal with a soft sigh, the tremble in his hand betraying the turmoil within. He rose, the burden of faith and doubt heavy upon his shoulders. "We leave this place changed," he said quietly, not defeated but marked. Jonathan nodded, gathering his equipment. "And we tell the world." As they stepped out into the chill morning air, the cathedral loomed behind them, a monument to faith, fear, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. The curse lingered still, a silent ember waiting beneath the ashes, a reminder that some fires refused to die. The road ahead was uncertain, but Father Elias knew one thing with unwavering clarity: the price of resurrection was steep, and the boundary between hope and despair was thinner than he had ever imagined. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the eternal flame pulsed faintly, waiting. The cathedral lay shrouded in a brittle twilight, the last slivers of daylight retreating behind the skeletal arches and fractured stained glass. Father Elias stood silent in the nave, the air thick with dust motes drifting lazily in the fading light. Around him, the ancient stones seemed to breathe with a quiet, mournful sigh, as if mourning the centuries of anguish they had witnessed. The candle, the eternal flame, had been extinguished days ago, yet an oppressive stillness clung to the ruins like a second skin. Elias closed his eyes, willing himself to find some semblance of peace. But the silence was broken not by sound but by sensation. At the edges of his consciousness, he felt the faintest flicker of movement, the whisper of voices just beyond hearing. A chill crept along his spine, and when he opened his eyes, the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Blue and red hues flickered in the corners, ghostly echoes of the flame that once burned so defiantly. He swallowed hard and whispered a prayer, though the words felt hollow on his lips. The curse, he realized, was not so easily banished. It lingered, a smoldering ember beneath the cold ashes of the extinguished candle. Not far away, in the caretaker's room cloaked in fading candlelight, Jonathan Crane sat hunched over his equipment. His camera's screen flickered erratically, capturing shadows that twisted and writhed with no apparent source. His breath fogged the glass as a sudden chill swept through the room, and his fingers trembled involuntarily. A distorted shape passed behind him in the grainy footage, vanishing when he spun around. The room was empty, yet the sensation of unseen eyes pressed heavily upon him. What the hell is going on here? Jonathan muttered, rubbing his arms against the cold. He glanced back at the screen, the recorded whispering voices taunting him from the speakers. The paranormal footage was more than he had bargained for, yet his curiosity pushed him onward. There was a story here, one that transcended mere superstition. Meanwhile, Sister Miriam led Elias through forgotten corridors, their footsteps echoing softly against cracked stone. They stopped before a shadowed alcove where ancient frescoes clung stubbornly to peeling plaster. The images were faded but unmistakable, souls rising from flames, their faces twisted in agony and hope. Elias traced the outlines with a trembling finger, a sorrowful weight settling in his chest. These were painted before Father Gregory's final ritual, Miriam whispered. The people believed the flames would purify the soul, but instead, they trapped the damned. Elias nodded slowly. The paintings were a somber testament to the cathedral's haunted legacy, hope corrupted into eternal torment. That night, Elias found no rest. Locked in his sparse chamber, shadows danced just beyond the candlelight. His mind drifted back to the crypt, where the source of the curse simmered beneath layers of earth and silence. In a sudden, vivid vision, he was plunged into the past. Flames erupted uncontrollably as Father Gregory's resurrection ritual spiraled into chaos. Souls screamed in anguish, their faces contorted in a silent scream that echoed through the catacombs. The fire consumed and damned, leaving behind a void filled with sorrow and rage. Elias gasped awake, sweat chilling on his brow. The vision lingered like a wound, a brutal reminder of the price paid for unnatural resurrection. The eternal flame was more than a mere candle, it was a prison for restless souls, a cursed beacon of corrupted faith. As dawn crept once again over the cathedral, Elias stood at the threshold, his resolve hardened yet his spirit burdened. The flame might be gone from sight, but its echo haunted every stone, every shadow. The curse was not finished with them. It whispered promises of return, of darkness rekindled. Jonathan joined him, wary but resolute. "Your victory feels fragile," he said quietly. Elias nodded. Fragile, yes, but real for now. Yet deep in his heart, he knew the eternal flame's story was far from over. The echoes in the dark would continue to call, and he would be drawn back into the shadows again and again until the curse was finally laid to rest or consumed him utterly. With a final glance back at the cathedral's looming silhouette, Elias turned away, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing heavily upon him. The eternal candle refused to die, and neither could the memories it had forged in flame and shadow. As the sun rose higher, the cathedral seemed to breathe with life once more, not of hope, but of a lingering dread that would not fade. The end was not yet written. Father Elias sat on the cold stone steps near the nave's entrance, the remnants of the cathedral's grandeur crumbling silently around him. His journal, a battered leather-bound book, rested open on his knees, the pen moving slowly across the pages as he tried to capture the torrent of thoughts swirling in his mind. The faint scent of extinguished smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the musty odor of ancient stone and decayed wood. Outside, the first hints of dawn painted the sky with muted hues, but inside shadows clung stubbornly to every corner. He paused, his hand trembling slightly, and looked up at the shattered stained glass windows. Fragments of colored light scattered across the cracked floor, a ghostly echo of the cathedral's former glory. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of settling masonry and the distant call of a solitary bird. Elias's breath came in slow, measured draws as he wrestled with the overwhelming weight of what he had witnessed. The eternal flame that cursed candle had changed everything he thought he knew about faith and the supernatural. Once he had been a skeptic, confident in reason and theology, dismissing whispered tales as superstition. Now that certainty had been shattered like the shattered glass around him. His journal was his refuge. Each word he wrote was a confession, a prayer, a reckoning. He chronicled the flickering flame that refused to die, the souls bound in torment, the malevolent force lurking beneath the cathedral's stones. He wrote of his failed attempts to snuff out the candle, the harrowing visions that had shaken his resolve, and the sacrifices made in the shadowed crypt below. As he wrote, footsteps echoed softly behind him. Jonathan Crane approached, his camera bag slung casually over one shoulder, eyes wary but alert. The young journalist offered a quiet nod, his presence a steady anchor amid the swirling storm of doubt and fear. Still writing, Jonathan asked, his voice low, respectful. Elias nodded without looking up, trying to make sense of it all. Words are the only way I can hold on to something real. Jonathan settled beside him, pulling a flask from his coat. He offered it to Elias, who shook his head. No, thank you, I get it, Jonathan said softly. This place. It changes you. I've seen things, recorded things I can't explain. But somehow, being here, it's made me believe there's more than what we can see. Elias managed a faint smile, the first in days. Perhaps belief isn't about certainty, but about acceptance. Accepting the mysteries we cannot unravel. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully, and for a moment, the two men sat in companionable silence, the vast emptiness of the cathedral enclosing them like a fragile sanctuary. Later that day, Sister Miriam appeared quietly in the nave, her frail figure moving with reverence toward the ruined altar. The tatters of her habit whispered against the stone floor as she knelt, hands clasped tightly, whispering prayers that seemed to echo softly through the hollow space. The fading sunlight filtered through the broken stained glass, casting fractured patterns of crimson and gold on her bowed head. Elias watched from a distance, feeling a pang of sorrow and warmth. Sister Miriam embodied a steadfast faith that had endured centuries of darkness and loss. Her presence was a reminder that even in the face of cursed fire and restless souls, hope and devotion endured. He approached her slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile moment. Sister Miriam, he said gently. She looked up, eyes soft but resolute. Father Elias, you carry a heavy burden. I do. The flame, the curse, it has changed me. I'm not sure I will ever see the world as I once did. She nodded knowingly. Faith is not unshackable stone, but a living flame. It can falter, dim, and even nearly die. But it can also be rekindled, transformed. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in embracing the unknown. Elias absorbed her words, feeling a fragile thread of comfort weaving through his despair. As twilight deepened, Elias prepared to depart. He gathered his belongings, the weight of the cathedral's history heavy on his shoulders. At the threshold he paused, casting one last glance into the darkened interior. Where the eternal candle had burned, a faint, unearthly glow pulsed softly, a blue-red flicker barely perceptible in the gloom. The flame refused to die. A shiver ran through Elias, a mixture of unease and resolve. He stepped out into the cold dawn, the chill air filling his lungs as the cathedral's shadows seemed to breathe behind him. He knew that the curse would linger, as would the questions it left unanswered. But so too would the hope, fragile, flickering, eternal. With a deep breath, Elias walked away, the journal heavy in his satchel, the weight of his journey etched forever into his soul. The path ahead was uncertain, but he was changed. A man marked by fire, faith, and the haunting light of a candle that refused to die. The cathedral lay drenched in an eerie calm as dawn crept over the horizon. its light pale and fragile against the stained glass that hung shattered in silent testimony to time's cruel hand. Father Elias lingered in the nave, his eyes tracing the fractured hues that danced across the cold stone floor, where the candle had once burned with a fire both unnatural and relentless. Now, the space was empty, save for the faintest hint of light, a ghostly pulse that seemed to breathe beneath the dust and rubble. He moved slowly toward the altar, where the candle holder sat like an abandoned sentinel. Kneeling, Elias placed a trembling hand beside it, feeling the chill that radiated from the stone. It was then that he saw it, a subtle flicker of ethereal blue and red, a heartbeat of flame that defied extinguishment. The eternal candle, though no longer a flame in the visible sense, still lived in the shadows beneath the cathedral's bones. Jonathan Crane, ever the observer, was crouched nearby, his camera poised to capture any sign of the supernatural. His rugged face was etched with uncertainty, the skepticism that had driven him to document Elias' journey, now tempered by awe at the cathedral's lingering mystery. "I don't know what to make of it," he murmured, lowering his camera. "It's like the flame has slipped beneath the veil but hasn't died." Elias nodded, a hollow ache settling deep in his chest. "The curse, it's not finished with this place. Neither am I." Behind them, near the entrance, Sister Miriam sat quietly on a crumbling pew. Her eyes, soft and tired, watched Elias with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. In her hands, she clutched a worn prayer book, whispering ancient words that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The habit she wore was tattered, mirroring the ruin around them, yet her spirit remained unbroken, an anchor in the storm of despair. "You must leave this place," she said softly, her voice a fragile thread in the vast emptiness. "But carry the memory and the lesson with you. Faith is never simple. Sometimes it lives in the shadows between belief and doubt." Elias rose slowly, the weight of her words sinking into his soul. He turned once more to the candle holder, the faint pulse of the eternal flame a silent promise and a dire warning. The cathedral, for all its decay and silence, still breathed with the curse's breath, poised between hope and despair. As they stepped into the rising sun, the cathedral behind them seemed to exhale, the shadows lengthening and whispering secrets yet untold. The candle that refused to die was not just a relic of ancient rites or a symbol of corrupted faith, it was a living testament to the fragile boundary between life and death, between salvation and damnation. Elias walked away, his journal clutched tightly, his heart heavy yet strangely lightened. The journey had changed him, shattered his certainty, transformed his belief, and left him forever marked by the eternal flame's haunting glow. Though the candle's visible fire was gone, its pulse echoed in the silence, a reminder that some flames, once lit, never truly die. And in that quiet, uncertain dawn, the cathedral waited, its curse lingering like a breath caught between worlds, waiting for the next spark to ignite the eternal fire once more.